People say the LSAT is impossible, but let me tell you what I did. I tried to outsmart the test, so I wrote questions harder than those that actually appear on the LSAT itself. Questions so tough, they'd break the minds of even the best test takers. And guess what happened? I hit a wall. Not because I wasn't creative enough, but because the LSAT has hardwired patterns that limit how difficult it can get. And today I'm going to show you those hidden structural rules. And once you see them, you'll realize the LSAT's difficulty is actually its biggest giveaway. First, for those who don't know me, my name is Steve Schwartz. I've been teaching the LSAT since 2005, and I personally increased my own LSAT score from a 152 to a 175. Now, the LSAT has a reputation for being a gatekeeper. It's complex, it's tricky, and it's ruthless. But here's the dirty little secret. They can't do just anything. The LSAT actually has rules that it has to follow. It must always present questions in ways that are fair, testable, and measurable. And when I tried to push beyond these limits, making questions with ridiculous levels of complexity, I discovered something incredible. The LSAT's hardest questions all follow the same 3 patterns. If you understand these patterns, you'll know exactly what the test can and cannot do. There are 3 rigid patterns every LSAT question follows, no matter how complicated it looks. I call this the question architecture system. And once you know the system, suddenly the hardest questions become predictable. It's like seeing the scaffolding behind a building. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. Let me take a step back to how I got here. I started off by challenging myself. Could I write a question so hard it would stump anyone? I created hypercomplex stimuli with lengthy, obscure references, weird premises stacked on top of each other, and answer choices that twisted logic into knots. But each time I pushed too far, I realized I was breaking the rules the LSAT must follow. The test writers can't rely on pure confusion or nonsense. They have a structure, a blueprint they must respect. By bumping up against these invisible walls, I mapped them out, and these patterns shape every single question you'll face on the LSAT. The first pattern I discovered I call the conclusion constraint. Every argument on the LSAT, no matter how convoluted, has a clearly discoverable main point. This isn't optional. Without a main conclusion, the question wouldn't test reasoning, it would just be chaos. The test's creators must ensure that you can find that conclusion. Now here's what this means for you. No matter how hard the passage tries to misdirect you, the conclusion is always there, waiting to be identified. If you know what to look for, you've neutralized half the complexity. For example, imagine an argument that throws in 5 technical terms, references historical events, and adds a weird hypothetical scenario. You might think, where the heck is this going? But if you zoom in, you'll realize the LSAT can't hide the conclusion forever. It might be stated plainly near the end, or disguised as a claim that everything else supports. But once you see that main point, you've set the anchor that makes the rest make sense. The second pattern I call the premise framework. Every argument relies on premises that must be logically relevant and testable. The test writers can't put in random nonsense that fails to support anything. They can stack subtle details, but they can't break the rule that each premise either supports or relates directly to that conclusion. For example, the implication here is if you know that each sentence must serve a purpose, you can start seeing patterns. A premise that's too bizarre or doesn't connect in any way won't appear. Every premise either strengthens, weakens, or clarifies the conclusion. So for example, let's say the question involves a medical scenario. A researcher claims a certain treatment works. The premises might be study results, expert opinions, or comparison cases. They won't give you premises about, say, the designer's fashion sense, unless it's relevant to how the argument is built. There's a structural limit on how wild they can get. Now, the third pattern I call the answer choice architecture, and this might be the biggest one. Every answer choice, right or wrong, must be justifiably correct or incorrect. The test writers have a limited toolbox. They can't give you absurd nonsense that everyone would reject in a second, nor can they give two equally correct answers. They must craft tempting wrong choices with subtle but definable flaws. Meaning, wrong answers are predictable. They often distort the conclusion, misapply a principle, or rely on an irrelevant detail. Once you learn the handful of common tricks, you'll see them reused over and over. For example, in a question testing your ability to identify assumptions, wrong answers may introduce new, unrelated info, or slightly change a key concept. If you know where to look for these patterns, you'll be able to eliminate the wrong answers with confidence. Now, here's where this gets practical. After I discovered these patterns, I started applying them to real LSAT questions, and suddenly, the test's complexity dropped by a factor of 10. Before, a tough question felt like a maze with no clear exit sign. But afterwards, it was like a children's puzzle with just a few missing pieces. You know where the pieces must fit because the rules don't allow them to go anywhere else. Now, when you approach an LSAT question, start by locating the conclusion. Look at the premises and map how they serve the conclusion, then check the answer choices and watch how the wrong ones fail in systematic, predictable ways. You're not wrestling with confusion or navigating a maze with no exit. You're just sorting the elements into predictable slots. Now, to summarize, how do we apply these patterns? Once again, you start with the conclusion. Ask yourself, do the premises connect to the conclusion in a logical, clear fashion? And how are the wrong answers distorted versions of what I need? If you do this repeatedly, you'll wire your brain to see the patterns before you even finish reading the question. Now, the tougher the question, the more obvious these constraints become, because the LSAT can't break its own rules to increase the difficulty. There's a paradox at play here. Complexity shines a spotlight on these patterns once you know to look for them. When you encounter a dense, scary question, realize it's forced to follow these same patterns, and that's your edge. So don't just spot these patterns once, drill them. Take a set of actual LSAT logical reasoning questions and label the conclusion, ID the premise structure, and categorize how each wrong answer choice fails. Over time, this becomes automatic. You'll read a question and instantly know, here's the conclusion hook, here's the premise layout, and here's where the wrong answers are weak. You stop guessing and you start predicting. Now, if you'd like my help with this is exactly what we guide students to do at LSAT Unplugged through our live online classes, on-demand video courses, small group coaching, and one-on-one coaching. And being able to apply this process to even the toughest LSAT questions is what separates students in the 150s and 160s from those in the 170s to 175 and beyond. You can check out the links below to find out more about our programs and to book a call with me and my team. We'd be glad to help you out. Now, this applies not just to logical reasoning, but to reading comprehension as well. If we consider in logical reasoning a strengthen or weaken question, the argument's conclusion might be that a certain policy will improve education. The premises give studies or examples, and the correct answer will, of course, consistently relate directly to how these premises support or fail to support that conclusion. And wrong answers, by necessity, go off on tangents or shift the argument's scope every single time. In reading comp, the process is the same. The main idea is always there, waiting to be discovered. The premises in the paragraphs unfold in a structured way, and even the trickiest answer choices must adhere to rules. If an answer choice contradicts a stated fact, it's wrong. If it introduces a completely off-topic idea, it's wrong. Once you see they can't slip in random nonsense, you quickly filter out distractions. Now, I know the LSAT seems infinite in its capacity for complexity, but it's not. It's a carefully controlled system with strict boundaries. And these patterns I've talked about, the conclusion constraint, the premise framework, and the answer choice architecture, form a triple lock the LSAT cannot break. Understanding these patterns transforms your approach from feeling outnumbered and overwhelmed to feeling like you've got the blueprint. You're no longer a victim of complexity, you're a strategist who sees the test's moves before they're played. If you found this insightful or illuminating, apply these ideas in your next practice session. Don't just read the questions, dissect them. Once you see the patterns, the LSAT goes from being a puzzle to a predictable system you can navigate with confidence. If you'd like my help with this, you can check out the links below to book a call. We'd be glad to help you out. And in the meantime, I'll wish you all the best and take care.